Welcome to the latest episode of Buckle Up Garage. Today we're going to take a look at some of your basic choices for cylinder heads on Mopar wedge engines. The 361, 3D3, 400, and 440. Alright, so what we have here are three of your basic choices for the Mopar Big Block wedge cylinder heads. These would work on 361s, 383s, 400s, 426 wedge, and the 440. What we have is the 452 casting, the 516 casting, and then the 440 source aluminum stealth head. So let's take a look at some of the differences in these things. Different valve sizes, chamber styles, just basic structure. Alright, the first casting we're going to take a look at is the 452. The 452 replaced the 906, and the 906 ran from, I believe, 68 through 76. The 452 took its place. The main difference is the 452 has hardened exhaust seats. It is an open chamber design, just like the 906 is. And I believe if you were to, and I don't have a CCing kit here, but most of these are going to CC out at about 90. I think where these kind of fell from grace back in those days was that there was never like a high performance version of like a 400 or 440 that had 452s on it. Most of those engines that these came on were already neutered in compression ratios using dished pistons. I think most of them were like 7.5, 7.6 to 1 compression. I think they're rated a little higher, and I think the vast majority of them were lower compression than what they were advertised at. But as far as a straight comparison to the 906, the flow rates from the factory were pretty much the same, both on the intake side and the exhaust side. They are perfectly suitable for your basic street engine. You can do port work to them, get them to flow better. But in the end, they are still Mopar big block heads that never really were the best flowing to begin with. They essentially are like a small block Chevy cylinder head as far as how they flow. But let's get a little closer look at some of the guts. Okay, the first thing that I'm going to show you on the 452s is the valve size from the factory. The intake valves are 2.08. Hopefully you can kind of see that. It's actually a little slightly smaller than that, but 2.08 is what they're advertised at. And the exhaust valve is 1.74. Again, slightly smaller than that. Valve springs are singles. I've already kind of disassembled these so you can kind of see this stuff. You have your typical umbrella seals on the exhaust side, and you can get better seals than this on the intake. I believe it's nitrile is the way to go, the ones that have the kind of the spring around them. It's a little bit better for more of a performance aspect. Now, these cylinder heads that I have, I actually ran an engine a while ago, and I was having some valve sealing issues. So I went with a different set of 452s that I got from a friend of mine that I know had been worked, and we're ready to go. The 452s and the 906s also have the outer studs are open to the water jackets, so you need to kind of leave those in if you're not going to drain the coolant out of it. It's kind of a known thing with these. Nothing out of the ordinary. There's very much nothing out of the ordinary with these cylinder heads. They haven't really been touched. I think I might have done a little bit of gasket matching work on the intake side. Yeah, does look like I tried to kind of clean them up a little bit. Whether it did any good or not, I have absolutely no idea, but that is the 452. It's about a 90cc open chamber, 2.08 intake valves, and 1.74 exhaust valves. The advantage being the hardened seats on the exhaust side, and that's about it. Alright, so now we are looking at the 516 cylinder head. These were mid to late 60s. I believe they discontinued these in 1967 or 1968. I guess the advantage of these is it is a closed chamber design. The CC volume on these generally measures in at 78 to 80 cc's. So you've got a compression jump that you're going to get by using these, and probably better quench because you've got a smaller area that the fuel is getting compressed into. And the big downfall of these is the port sizes. The flow on these is not what the 452 and the 906s are right out of the box. The biggest hurdle on these, and the biggest thing that's kind of stifling them, is while the intake valves are still 2.08 like it is on the other ones, the exhaust valve size is a 1.6, significantly smaller. While, if that's what you have to use, they're going to do the job for you, but I don't think you'd really want to use these on any of the bigger displacement engines. The 361 and the 383, you can live with these with a reasonably mild cam, but you start getting into a bigger cam that's needs more airflow. The work that it's going to take, you're going to run out of porting on these things to get the flow out of them that you can out of the other ones. But again, in a smaller engine that's maybe just a daily drive around, you're not looking for taking it to the drag strip or something like that. These would probably be perfectly fine. It is pretty common, like I said, you're going to want to probably upgrade to hardened valve seats. So right when you're doing that, you can upgrade to the larger size exhaust valves, kind of overcome some of the problems that these things have. The real quick way to identify these versus the 452s and the 906s if they're on an engine, well, first, if you pull the valve cover, is looking for the casting number on it. But the 516 does not have a core plug on the outer edge or the outer side of these. So that's the quick way to visually tell a 516 from the other variants. Hey, another thing that I noticed taking these apart and kind of going side by side, I'm not 100% sure if either of these heads are just the factory valve train, but just something I noticed on these. This is the spring off the 452. It is obviously a single spring. I believe these are factory, and this has got a spring height that measures at, I don't know if you can see that, measures at about 2.52, 2.53 spring height. And the 516s are significantly less at 2.24. You can see that. The 516 also, well, it's not a double spring, it's got a extra spring damper inside. So as you can see, significantly shorter. So the spring rates on these are pretty wildly different. Like I said, the 516 is essentially like a low performance, just the mundane street engine. They weren't really looking for performance on that. The 452, pretty much the same deal, just 10 years farther down the road with some minor improvements. Like I said, I guess if you want to consider them improvements, is the open chamber. versus the closed chamber. I think that's the advantage that the 516 had, is a little bit more compression and probably a better burn in the closed chamber heads versus the open chambers. So we're going to now move on to taking a look at the 440 source heads. All right, so we've taken a look at the two of the cast iron factory offerings, the 516 and the 452 head. We are now taking a look at the 440 source stealth head. First thing that I would say would be of note is it is considered a closed chamber. While it is not exactly the same style as the 516, I believe these are advertised at 80 cc's. From what I've seen, and as I stated before, I don't have a CCing kit here. From what I'm seeing when I go online, they usually measure anywhere from 80 to 82 cc's. So there will be, if you're running a 906 or a 452 open chamber, there'd be a pretty significant increase in compression ratio. The 400 that I have in my white Chrysler, if I do the figuring of head gasket thickness and how far the pistons are in the hole, and I'm running sealed power, essentially flat top replacement pistons. That engine right now with 452s on it is running at about 8.5 to 1 compression, just a touch under. I believe these will probably get it closer to 9.5, 9.25, 9.5. One of the other big factors in these is the size of the intake and the exhaust valves. These 440 source cylinder heads run at 214 on the intake and 181 on the exhaust. So right there, you've already got a flow advantage over the stock valve sizes, and a very significant increase over the 516 on the exhaust side. The other advantage in these is, these are just as cast. You can purchase these with the, they have a CNC porting that they'll do to increase the flow on these. But even out of the box, just as cast, these flow considerably more than the cast iron factory heads. I believe if we are looking at just general flow numbers, and I kind of jotted them down here because I'm probably going to forget, and I'm not that much of a numbers guru. The 906s and the 452s, generally it says that they run at 500-inch lift, about 234 and 218 respectively. CFM on the intake side, and the exhaust is pretty much identical at about 155, 156. The 516s, those run at, on the intake side, again at 500 lift, about 216 CFM and about 138 CFM on the exhaust side. So you can see right there the 516 struggles for flow. 906s and 452s are better. The stealth heads, these are advertised at 156 CFM on the intake and 178 on the exhaust side. So these out of the box are going to flow probably about as good as pretty well ported and polished cast iron heads. And the other big advantage is, and I scaled these for weight, the cast iron ones, the 452s and the 516s are exactly the same at dead nuts 50 pounds per cylinder head. The stealth heads were at 28.4. A pretty significant weight advantage, these versus the cast irons. So you've got pretty much everything going for you with these. Again, these are not like a high horsepower, they're not intended for racing. I mean, you can make them do that, but these are, in my opinion, are just a very, very good alternative for a factory replacement head. They're going to flow better. They weigh less. The reason they're called stealth heads is if you look at the ends of these, if you were to paint these the same color as your engine block, unless you're really looking close, you're not going to be able to tell these are aluminum, if that's your thing. Most of the higher end aluminum heads, this is all pretty much flush, and they've usually got, Edelbrock on them, or Twisted Flow, or, whatever brand you're running. These are made to kind of fly under the radar and basically just give you a little bit of an advantage over the cast iron heads. And it really comes down to it. I bought these right before Christmas, and they were having a little bit of a sale. So I think I saved $100 on the pair. I think right now, if you were to go on their site, they sell these for $700 a piece. Even if you were to get the factory cast iron heads and just pay for the machining work to resurface and do some of the basics, put the bigger valves in them, you're going to be at that price range without a doubt. And you're still not going to have the weight advantage on these. So let's get a little closer look on some of the ports. Okay, so let's take a little closer look at the setup on the 440 source heads, because obviously I bought these because I intend to use them, but I just thought everybody'd like a little bit of a comparison just to see what these are all about compared to what most people are running on their stock builds. Again, valve size significantly larger. We've got the 214s on the intake side, and we've got the 181s on the exhaust side. Right there, advantage. The valve springs that they come with, they're rated as being good up to a 550 lift. Not really a significant valve spring. I don't have the ratings on these, but at factory height, they, if I'm comparing them to the measurements I took on the cast iron ones, these pretty much split the difference at spring height. These are 2.39. Just as a reference, the 452s I had were 2.51, and the 516s were 2.24. The 452s were a single spring with no damper. The 516s have the damper, and the 440 sources have the extra damper in them. These are single groove valves versus the factory ones that usually on the exhaust side are 3 groove and 2 groove on the intake. I guess I don't generally have an opinion of that. I think for basically a factory or basically a mild application, these would be just fine. And I believe the retainers are 7 degree versus 10 degree, which is considered more of the high performance. So for what I've got going on, these are going to be perfectly fine. If you're going to be going more to like a higher lift roller camshaft, or even a flat tappet, I would say obviously you want to get the springs that your cam manufacturer recommends, and probably go to the 10 degree retainers just to make sure everything holds together for you at high RPM. But this engine is probably never going to see the high side of 5,000, 5,500 RPM. Valve seals, again, the factory ones have the rubber umbrella seals on the exhaust side, and the cap style on the intake. These, I'm going to say, are a significantly better seal on both valves. They've got the metal band on them. I think they're going to hold together better. As far as spark plug location, it is exactly as the cast iron heads are. These are straight spark plugs. They don't, they're not angled like some of the aluminums are. The advantage there is these heads will work with pretty much any header that's going to work on a cast iron head or exhaust manifold. I'm going to be running the HP manifolds again on these. These also are not open. The studs and the bolt holes are not open into the water jackets on these. So you don't have to worry about that draining the coolant like we've had to do for years on the cast iron ones. Again, from the end, they look just like a cast head. They've got the core plug that the 452 and the 906s have. Again, like I mentioned, the 516s don't have that from the factory. That's one of the telltale signs. Again, these are as cast. You can get these with the CNC port work done on them. Let me just kind of flip these around real quick. And one other thing I would suggest is buying the 440 Sources cylinder head bolt kit. Part number 109-1514. Comes with washers, long and short bolts that are specifically for those heads. Can you get away without them? Probably, but cheap insurance. So yeah, when you buy your heads, I would recommend getting their head bolts as well. Okay, now I've got the valves out so we can kind of get a shot. The exhaust port, like I said, these are as cast. While you could probably go in there and just, touch these up a little bit, get a little bit more, a little bit of a lip there, a little bit of an edge. You could probably work down the valve guide edges. I'm not really going to touch these because, I'll be honest, I've messed around a little bit with that kind of stuff, and I think these are going to be a big enough advantage over what I've got as they are. I don't want to take the chance of messing them up. But even as cast, these probably are smoother than what you're going to get out of the cast iron. This is the intake side. Like I said, these do flow out of the box better than the cast iron ones do. Probably even a little better than they do after you've had them worked. More of a close-up on the chamber shape. The closed chamber factory ones are a little tighter in here, and actually kind of more of a heart shape. Very slightly, but a little bit more of a heart shape, whereas this is more of a gradual taper into the valves. I think the heart shape gives you a better quench, but I think having this a little bit more of a taper is essentially unshrouding the valves a little bit. It's going to give, I think, a little bit of an advantage on the flow in and out of the combustion chamber. Like I said, these are advertised at 80 cc's. From what I'm seeing online, they generally measure anywhere from 80 to 82 cc's. One of the other significant differences in the 440 Source aluminum heads versus the cast iron factory is the aluminum head has no heat crossover. Advantage, performance-wise, is going to help keep your intake charge cooler. Disadvantage, if you run this thing on a daily engine that's going to see some cold weather, it's going to be a little more cold-blooded when you first fire it up. You're not going to get the fuel atomization quite as quickly, and it's probably going to be a little bit of a pig when you're first firing it up. Also, what I've noticed is let me get something I can kind of point out here. There is more material in here. This is generally very wide open in the factory heads, obviously, except for where they cast in for the head bolt. This is going to be a push rod hole. That is also a push rod hole. This, I believe, is just there for oil drain back. But I think this is left in here to give this some stability. Being aluminum heads, it's a little weaker, I guess you would say. I don't know that you'd want to hog all that out like it is in the factory cast irons. You've also, because there's no heat crossover, there's not as much meat in here where that heat crossover normally would be. Another nice thing in the 440 Source heads is you can run the factory rocker arms, the stamped steel ones, on the rocker shafts, or any of the aftermarket roller tip rockers will work on these. I am thinking about going to the roller tip rockers simply because you do a little research on the stamped ones from the factory. While they are rugged as hell and very dependable, they generally are a little inconsistent on their ratio. They're from the factory generally thought of as being 1.5 to 1. I think if you do a little research, it's more like 1.4 to 1. So you run the factory ones, you are losing a little lift, lifted duration, all that. And I think going to the roller tip ones, they're a little bit more specific. to 1.5 or 1.6. For what I'm running, I'm going to be looking for 1.5s. And not to mention the roller tips kind of cut down on friction and give you that same stability. I just think it's going to be a good upgrade. If we look at the intake port as best as you can see, I think there could be a little bit of cleanup. You see that casting ridge there. You can see a little bit of a casting ridge there. Like I said, I don't know if I want to mess around with these because I'm by no means a cylinder head porter. But I think I could maybe just lightly kind of clean these up a little bit and make some kind of a difference. So, like I said, I think for the money, what you're going to spend on the machining work on the cast factory heads, the 440 source is probably the best way to go on just a milder street engine. I don't think anybody's buying the 440 source heads to use in a high RPM, high horsepower race application. It's just not what they're for. They are designed and meant to be a factory replacement head from essentially stock to a mild street engine. Like I said, the springs and everything are rated to 550 lift. By today's standards, that's pretty mild. I think if that's what you're going after, these aren't the heads for you. But if this is something that you're planning on driving, or you just want a little extra bang for your buck for compression and for flow numbers, this is a good way to go. Because let's be honest, nothing's getting any cheaper. Machining work, good machining work, first off, is hard to find. And second, when you find it, isn't cheap. So you're going to easily stick the same amount of money into a set of factory cast iron heads as you are, if not more, than what you're going to spend on these stealth heads. And you're going to get similar results. Plus you get a weight savings. Like I said, you're going from a 50-pound head to one that's like 28 pounds. So you're taking a little weight off the nose of the car. Is it a significant amount overall? Not really. But what the hell? It's an advantage. So I guess in closing this, I bought these for exactly the reason I'm talking about. I've gone through a couple of sets of heads on the engine that's in the white car with varying amounts of success, and I just figured this is the way to go. Money well spent on a cylinder head that's going to probably give me years and years and years of service, and it's going to wake that engine up a little bit, maybe significantly. I don't know. I think I'm going to gain about a point of compression. I'm definitely getting some more flow out of it, so it's going to be a little happier at freeway speeds. So I appreciate you tuning in. I hope maybe you got something out of this. I try not to talk over my head when it comes to numbers and things like that. I mean, I'm sure you guys are checking out the internet on all this stuff as well. Maybe I was accurate on stuff, maybe I was a little off, but I think just the average guy looking for a decent cylinder head, you can't go wrong with these. So until our next episode, again, appreciate you tuning in. My name's Corey. This is Buckle Up Garage. Later.